Every so often, I'll have company over, and inevitably my manga library becomes a point of interest, even for those that generally don't read or engage in the medium. A question that often gets brought up is, what kind of manga would younger kids enjoy reading? I have 6 nieces and nephews, as well as a number of young kids in my family, so it's a fair question to ask somebody who might know. Obviously, a lot of people would bring up Shonen Jump, Pokemon, or even Viz's recent string of video game-focused manga like Animal Crossing, Kirby, or Mario. But for my money, I always tend to go with the same answer. And it's one that doesn't get talked about all that often, despite its massive worldwide popularity. Those manga? Disney manga. Since the mid-2000s, Disney and manga have gone hand in hand with one another. Whether it's a direct adaptation of an original property, a retelling from a different perspective, a brand new story in an established universe, or something entirely new, for almost 2 decades, the world of Disney and manga have been intertwined. But why is it that nobody really talks about them? How is it that one of the world's largest oligopolies, with a hand in everything from ESPN to Star Wars to Marvel, theme parks, music, television networks, why does it rarely promote its contributions to the rising world of manga in the West? They had a hand in introducing popular culture to the world of anime with their near 24-year relationship with Studio Ghibli, and just last November they teamed with Kadokawa to bring more anime to Disney Plus and Hulu with an exclusive partnership. Yet, if I were to tell you that a new Nightmare Before Christmas manga was being released this September, the 4th in the last decade, would you know that? Would you know that, at the time of this writing, a brand new manga in the world of Turning Red was just released by Viz, one of the 3 main Western publishers of Disney manga? Would you know that a large portion of the success of Disney manga is thanks to Shoujo magazines taking a chance on an unproven work with the Disney umbrella? Chances are, the answer to all those questions would probably be no. And I want to figure out why that is. The answer is probably depressingly simple given the kind of videos I make, but I still want to give it the old researcher try, and what better way to do that than by buying and reading every single Disney manga that has ever been released, and trying to figure out whether or not there's a pattern to this whole conundrum. But where did all this originate from? I'm not sponsored by Tokyo Pop, Viz, Yen Press, or Disney, so I have no financial stake in this idea, nor am I under any sort of sponsorship deal, so what would possess me to buy over 50 volumes of regular manga and 10 different series worth of cinemanga, totaling another 20 volumes, which, in the time since I started this endeavor, have been donated to my local library, for what could best be described as a loosely thrown together theory. A tweet from 10 months ago. Regardless of your thoughts on Twitter, and trust me, I have plenty, even as I spend a majority of my time now on Blue Sky and or Discord, there are bright spots of hope or interesting topics of discussion to be had on the platform. One such of these discussions came from the manga YouTuber HVL Manga, when she had made a tweet questioning the existence and quality of manga based on Disney properties. The tweet and its subsequent responses were all cordial, and she seemed open to the idea that there were indeed good books among the lot as responses started to pour in. But while all of that was going on, a germ of an idea popped up that would later cement a few days later when someone had asked me what my next collecting goal would be once I finished or got close to finishing my Shonen Jump line. I said only 3 words. Every Disney manga. 10 months later, and not only was that goal completed, but I had also taken the liberty of reading them all as well. But before we get into the books themselves, let's first take a look at the history of how we got to where we are now, a story that began 75 years ago. Regarded as the grandfather of modern anime and manga, Osamu Tezuka's love of drawing and animation began when he was a child, gathering inspiration from plays, nature, and especially imported films from Europe and North America, with a particular favorite of his being the works of Walt Disney. Alongside his lifelong interest in insects, animation, and drawing were some of Tezuka's biggest comforts, especially as he dealt with the destruction and devastation of World War II, up to and including the firebombing of his hometown of Osaka as a teenager. Despite studying to become a doctor, by the time World War II had ended, Tezuka had allegedly drawn over 3,000 pages of pictures, and at the age of 17 was hired by a local newspaper to write a 4-panel cartoon. By 1947, he had written a series titled New Treasure Island, a akabon, or red book, that was sold and produced as cheap entertainment on the streets to distract the people of Japan as they were rebuilding. Unlike the manga that had been produced before then, New Treasure Island was a long-form story, told primarily through pictures and inspired by his love of cinema, experimented with different styles, angles, sound effects, and perspectives, something Tezuka built on as his career grew. New Treasure Island sold 400,000 copies and catapulted Tezuka into the mainstream pop culture of Japan. As the 50s rolled on, series like Astro Boy and Kimba the White Lion were released, which became massive properties that sold hundreds of thousands of copies themselves. This would ultimately lead to both series getting adapted into animated television series, with Astro Boy being the first ever and Kimba being the first ever in color. They were integral to Japan's economic recovery in the 60s, and eventually even made their way over to the West, where they both became hot commodities as well. While Tezuka's story would continue for a number of years to follow, in between that time is where we begin to deviate. You see, Tezuka's favorite Disney film of all time was Bambi, a film that, according to many biographers, he had watched over 80 times. In 1951, he got the license to create a Bambi manga, which was approved by Disney's agent and distributor at the time, and he loved putting his own spin on the film so much that by 1952 he had attempted to create another manga, this time an adaptation of Pinocchio, which he ultimately did release, but due to copyright shenanigans and miscommunications with Japan and Disney, released as an unlicensed manga. The debate behind that one is long and arduous, but fascinating nevertheless. These were the first 2 Disney manga to ever be released, and it would be another 53 years before another series would hit store shelves. An interesting aside before we jump ahead, Tezuka actually did meet Walt Disney in person at the 1964 New York World's Fair, which Walt had a large part in helping put together, and had quite a bit to say in an interview when questioned about it. I admire Walt Disney. I am charmed by Walt Disney, and I decided my career would be inspired by Walt Disney. And I met him in New York, or I should say I just walked past him. On the opening day of the New York World's Fair, I was lucky enough to get a chance to talk to him. I came across him leaving the stage just after delivering a speech. I got nervous, but somehow introduced myself to him. I am the head of a Japanese animation studio. Nice to have you here. I'm the one that made Astro Boy. Really? I know Astro Boy. I saw the work in Los Angeles. It's great work. Thank you very much. My staff would be honored. Well, may I have your comment about the work? It's a very interesting sci-fi story. Future children are looking towards the space, so I myself think about making sci-fi too. If you have the time, visit me in Burbank. After both men had passed on and both anime and Disney animation had continued to grow, it seemed inevitable that they would eventually intersect again, outside of Lion King borrowing liberally from Kimba the White Lion and Disney opening a theme park in Tokyo in 1983. This would come in 1996, when Disney became the sole international distributor for Studio Ghibli after Manson International had fumbled Nausicaa by cutting 20 minutes and renaming the film to Warriors of the Wind. Despite some bumpy roads with Princess Mononoke after Harvey Weinstein had decided he wanted to trim down the nearly 2-hour-long film to something more palatable, which allegedly resulted in Ghibli sending a sword with a note saying "no cuts" to Weinstein, things were seemingly pretty smooth between Disney and Ghibli for their 24-year partnership. Sure, the marketing for their later films left a lot to be desired and ultimately led to Ghibli switching to G-Kids and cutting ties with Disney altogether in 2020, but during that period we got the first and only anime film to ever win an Oscar with Spirited Away, and paired with the Western boom of the late 90s and early 2000s, led to popular culture in the West becoming a lot more familiar with the idea of Japanese entertainment. Deciding they wanted to capitalize on this sudden new interest, a new Disney princess was suggested in 2005, but this time would come in a new form that hadn't been seen in nearly half a century. Manga. Her name? Kilala. For the sake of keeping this video under an hour, since I have nearly 70 books to get through and a lot of theory to get through as well, I won't do a deep dive on every single series that was released, but if you are interested in a deep dive somewhere down the line on some of these series, let me know in the comments below and maybe I can do a spotlight at some point. But with that said, let's take a look at Kilala Princess. First published in Shoujo magazine Nakayoshi, famous for Sailor Moon, Cardcaptor Sakura, Candy Candy, among many, many others, Kilala Princess follows Kilala Reno, a young girl obsessed with Disney princesses who one day dreams of finding her own Prince Charming and having a happily ever after herself. After finding a young man named Ray fast asleep on her lawn one day after coming home from school, she brings him into her house and decides to let him sleep some more, all the while wondering who he is and where he came from. Upon trying to tidy up after him, a tiara falls out of his coat pocket, and after waking up and meeting Ray's servant Valdo, is told that the tiara belongs to the 7th princess, and that only the princesses of legend can save the kingdom of Paradiso. Believing her best friend Erica, who's currently enrolled in a local princess contest, might be the person they're looking for, they travel to the contest only for a mysterious group of men to kidnap Erica and take her away. They stumble upon a door called the Gate of Dreams, and after the tiara starts to glow, Kilala puts the tiara on and wishes for a way to save Erica. When they come to, they find themselves in the world of Snow White and the 7 Dwarves, and from there begins an adventure as Kilala and Ray travel to different Disney worlds, collect gems that power up the tiara, and find a way to not only save Erica, but save the kingdom of Paradiso as well. Kilala Princess is probably best described as what would happen if Kingdom Hearts was written by an author well-versed in shoujo manga. That's not a derogatory statement either. While it leans heavily into stereotypes and tropes, it also does a great job of building up Kilala, Ray, and the rest of the supporting cast by giving them some real, honest depth. The interactions with the Disney princesses, though sometimes surface level, are quite charming, and the overarching narrative threads throughout the initial run are quite fun, and it ends on a really good note. The only issue is that years later, the ending was retconned in favor of a sequel series that got 1 volume and was never finished, or at least hasn't as of this writing. I'll get back to that in a moment, but I think it's worth bringing up the other 2 entries in the original shoujo trilogy of Disney manga, Magical Dance and Mirai and Marie. Magical Dance is the story of a girl named Rin who dreams of becoming a dancer, but lacks the skills and coordination in order to really be any good. When she joins a troupe with the intention of entering Dream Stage, a competition she's wanted to be part of since she was a child, she dedicates herself to the craft, but still struggles to get anywhere even after receiving help from another member. Near the point of quitting, Tinkerbell arrives and gives her a magic card that is soon revealed to summon Disney characters in order to help her dancing improve. You'd probably be remiss to think that Magical Dance lacks depth at only 2 volumes, but in actuality, the writer does a pretty good job of getting the point across in a 2-volume episodic way. The characters don't really get fleshed out a ton, but Rin is a very likable protagonist and somebody you want to see succeed, and the idea of never giving up on your dreams and believing in yourself, while cliché, is really good, and considering this book was written with a young audience in mind, it is commendable that they took the time to create something unique. Sure, it can lean a bit on the Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories side if we really want to beat this dead horse, but it's still fun. Sure, it's not explained all that well, but it is nice seeing Disney characters, especially some that don't end up getting their own Disney manga, come out and play with Rin, help her dance, and the whole thing wraps up really nicely. So what it lacks in depth, it makes up for in heart, and that's something that I really appreciate. Miria and Marie, likewise, is a story of a girl named Rai who lives in modern-day Japan, who is whisked away to 1910 Paris and told she comes from a long lineage of witches. In order to improve her skills, she is taught by Marie, the white cat from the Aristocats, who suddenly has magical abilities now for some reason, and over the course of unconnected smaller stories, Mirai learns all sorts of lessons about life, magic, as well as the lesson to never give up on your dreams. One word you'll hear a lot with all three of these books is heart, because heart is at the center of all three of the original Shoujo trilogy. And Mirai and Marie, despite being a one-volume series told out of order and not really given a ton of depth, has heart. The characters have heart. The story has heart. And the whole idea of being respectful, being kind, caring for others, these are lessons that are all still applicable no matter your age. If you take into effect the demographic and the kind of people that they're trying to reach, it's commendable what they were able to accomplish. And Mirai and Marie is probably the weakest of the three, but it only has one volume to get its story across, and in that one volume, I still think it does a really good job. These three books make up the core of what I like to call the original Shoujo trilogy. In fact, in a lot of ways, these three series are really the heart and soul of what makes Disney manga tick. You see, after reading every single manga that has the Disney license, you really start to get an idea of what to expect. They're either a wholly original story featuring Disney characters, a near one-to-one direct adaptation of the original source material with little to no changes besides the art style, an original story in an established universe like the Disney Fairies line of books, the Stitch series, which has both its own modern-day series as well as a story taking place in feudal Japan, the Descendants line of books, the Beauty and the Beast and Pirates of the Caribbean retelling with original elements, the Nightmare Before Christmas line, and then the outliers like this journal based on Amphibia. And then there's the Cinemanga, the ones that I no longer have. Now, these can range from everything from Lizzie McGuire to Kim Possible to even Stevens. There's 20 overall that Tokyopop released, and Tokyopop was the biggest to ever do the cinema comic, film comic, anime comic style. And if you aren't familiar with a cinemanga, it's essentially like a photo comic where they take stills from a live-action movie or television series or animation and put word bubbles on it. Usually they're shorter form and made for a younger audience to kind of ease them into the style of comic books or manga or something of the sort. And it's done in a way where you learn how to read and then you advance onto your more typical comic books. Now, these may seem like they're really cheap or poorly made, but in all actuality, they are really well made. And they tend to sell quite well. In fact, at one point, there was a cinemanga for Avatar The Last Airbender that, as it was releasing, was selling 500,000 copies of volume. So these aren't some cheap knockoffs that were made with no effort put in. They were just made with a younger audience in mind, much like everything else. And even though they weren't something I really wanted to keep, I wanted to send them off to somewhere in some place that they could be better utilized, and so that's why I ended up donating them to my local library. Easy reading books like that can be really important for a developing audience, so that's why if I could pay it forward, I will. If you're looking for what my favorite books out of the bunch would be, I'd say in terms of original stories or original type stories, it would be Zero's Journey, the Nightmare Before Christmas manga, Stitch and the Samurai, which is a fantastic 3-volume series, or the adaptations of Finding Nemo and Toy Story, because despite being one-to-one adaptations, the artwork is fantastic, so I'd say that those would probably be my favorites outside of the original Shoujo trilogy. In recent years, Viz and Yen Press have both dipped their toes in the manga universe with Big Hero 6 on the Yen side and Frozen, Corella, and Turning Red on the Viz side. It seems nowadays that in 2023, Viz and Tokyopop, who wrote a majority of these books and hold the license to the term Disney manga, split the load with different licenses, so it'll really be interesting to see where things go in the future from here, and whether or not any other companies decide to jump in. Regardless, to get back to my original point, those 3 series, Kilala, Mirai, and Magical Dance, despite only having 9 volumes between the 3 series, are the best examples of what makes a Disney manga tick. At their core, they're all written with a younger audience in mind, specifically young women. That's why even the manga that isn't directly published by a shoujo magazine is written or drawn by primarily shoujo creators. Even when they adopted a manga-style look and feel later on when Western creators primarily took over, they were still mostly women at the helm, or picked series that had a large female audience. The focus on inward, character-driven storytelling was always at the forefront, even in the more direct adaptations. Emotions and heart were always one of the biggest things. They had a specific goal in mind, and an audience that they believed would buy their product, which, given that we're 18 years in and books are still being released, gives me some hope that the future might still be bright, even if a little bit dim. Even Viz, who I've been critical of in the past with their 3 series so far, have also seemed to have followed that mindset, which, given their hesitancy towards promoting content for women, is nice to see. It is a double-edged sword, though, and it goes back to my whole thesis behind this project. Disney is a massive company with fingers in every aspect of media. It took them until the 21st century, but for almost 2 decades, they've been releasing a steady stream of manga or manga-style comics for young girls to read and enjoy. Where's the hype, though? Where's the push for more original content? Why announce a Kilala Princess sequel only to kneecap it after 1 volume? It's an answer that is sadly all too easy once you do a little bit of digging, but disappointing nevertheless. Because they took the time to market these books towards girls and young children at a certain age, both the public and companies as a whole look at that as a negative, since in their minds, if it's not young boys or the male demographic, it's not worth pursuing, or not worth pursuing in earnest, when chances are they believe they'll have moved on to something like Marvel or Star Wars. Not only that, but Disney, since acquiring Marvel, Fox, and Star Wars, has gotten a lot more buttoned up on what they do and do not allow, and if something isn't printing money for them, it goes on the back burner. Kingdom Hearts 3 and the treatment of the Frozen world is a good rabbit hole if you ever want to dig further into that recent conundrum. Because of this, despite manga shooting up massively in sales over the last few years to the point where it's now overtaking the graphic novel industry in most brick-and-mortar stores, there seems to be a hesitancy in terms of releases. Sure, you might get 1 to 3 books every now and again, but it's still nowhere close to where it was back in the mid to late 2000s. It doesn't help that because of Tokyopop's restructuring after the initial manga crash, certain licenses and properties got mixed around, so no one company owns all of the Disney properties, but the picking and choosing of properties and which company gets which license and the Disney oversight and everything else, just it's a lot more strained than it was before, and it really doesn't need to be. Even then, they aren't really receiving much pomp and circumstance when they are released, outside of the occasional social media posts, so most books recently have gone under the radar. I'm not saying Encanto, Raya, Wish, and other films absolutely needed manga adaptations or anything of the sort, but it seems like it would be beneficial long term for them to get back into releasing that, especially as we still are in a manga boom. It may seem like the easy answer to blame things on misogynistic business practices, both international and domestic, as well as muddied industry waters, and it might be disappointing 25 minutes into a video to have it be boiled down that quickly. But sometimes the truth is simpler than any kind of long-winded graph examination or industry-wide deep dive. I could pad things out, but every time I looked at a sales chart or read through another volume of manga, it became clearer and clearer it wasn't exactly a quality standard diminishing over time. Most books are solid, if not sometimes unremarkable, and it wasn't sales suddenly crashing either. In fact, one of the most recent Nightmare Before Christmas series ran a special deal with Cracker Barrel, and most books landed somewhere in the top 200 when they released, so the more I dug, the clearer it became that it was just groups of executives, mostly males, trying to juggle different properties while their priorities were elsewhere, and feminine media, like usual, being an easy target to focus less on. I oftentimes hate the term "it is what it is," but at this point, most shoujo and josei fans are used to that phrase, which is why we do what we do. Still, despite some professional muddying and bureaucracy between various companies, marketing teams, and license holders, Disney has left a lasting impact on the world of anime and manga, even if for most of the 20th century it was unintentional. They created a fantastic gateway into the world of manga with the books they've released, and have helped introduce people to shoujo sometimes before they even have any clue what it is. While most of their books are straight adaptations, when they do take a chance on an original story, it's more often than not great. Even if it's not winning any awards, it's still a fun, all-ages adventure for any and everyone to enjoy. With the industry continuing to boom, it's nice to see that there is an option out there for young kids to get introduced to manga, which is partially why I donated the Cinemanga to my local library. I love Pokemon, I love Nintendo properties, but there needs to be a bit more variety, and if Disney is one of the licenses to do that, then great. Reading should be a fun adventure, and should be accessible to as many people as possible. While I wish the marketing would be more consistent and more feminine media would be given a chance, that's an industry-wide issue that can't be solved in one day, or solved in one 25-minute YouTube video. I'm not somebody who often thinks pessimistically, or at least I try not to. Sure, things may not be as good as they once were, but with the way things are now, I would definitely take a never say never approach rather than the alternative. I didn't know what to expect when I set out on buying every Disney manga. It was a long and sometimes tedious journey, but it showed me just how creative some people can be when given a chance to shine. I would absolutely love to see another Mirai Marie, or another volume of Kilala Princess, or another magical dance type series, because when you take an original series within the Disney lore and do something unique with it, it's really special. If nothing else, the history and influence over the last century that Disney has had, to the point where Tezuka would watch Bambi 80 times and want to create his own manga version of it, and use the influence he had from Disney to create the manga and anime we know today, to have that influence is something really special. You may not like the corporations or the oligopoly or really any sort of the decisions they made there, but the influence Disney has had on the world of anime and manga is substantial and really speaks volumes to where we are today. Whether or not you go out of your way to read the manga doesn't really matter. What matters is that they're out there, and that there is an opportunity for all of these young people to have something to read. Because if you really boil it down, manga is for everyone, and sometimes all you really need is a little bit of that Disney magic. Hey everybody, I know it's probably weird that I'm releasing a video in the middle of the week and not on the weekend, but life happens, things happen, I just didn't want to delay the video any longer because this is something that I really wanted to put out. And, well, as you were probably well aware from looking at the video footage, I had to get creative since Disney tends to be quite litigious. But seriously though, if you do want me to do any more coverage on an individual Disney manga, I would be more than happy to, or just any video ideas in general. I've got a long list, and I always have a poll going on my Patreon, so if you have anything, just let me know. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and let me know what you think. All my social medias are @MacLovesManga, and until then, you have a great rest of your day, and keep on reading.